My parents came here from Dar es Salaam in 1971. My mum had already been to the UK to study.
Do you know what she did when she first came here?
So she was studying, so it wasn't really about work. She had polio, but because of the cost of travel, she didn't really go back home. So she was in a boarding school or in a hospital, and she actually grew up very regimented.
Do you see how any of that may have translated to how you were then raised in the home environment that you had?
We had to get dressed. We couldn't walk around in our pajamas.
Yeah.
I wish more of it had actually passed on to me, because I'm not like that anymore. But then maybe I was a bit of a rebellious teenager, and I was like, well, I don't want to do what my mum says.
Yeah.
So I probably did kind of, explore alcohol a little bit more, and very late nights and things that my parents might not have approved of so much.
Yeah.
By the time I was second year university, I actually did start going to the mosque once a week in Leeds. And so I think, internally, I was brought back to the culture and the religion in some way.
One of the things that I heard you said is that you got to a point where you started feeling stuck.
I wasn't enjoying my job as much. Like, I loved my job when I started it, but as soon as this change in management came, my husband had said to me, like, if you want to give it a go, give it a go. You're not enjoying this job anyway, so just see what happens. I have to really put myself out of my comfort zone in a lot of what I do, but you have to do it in order to help other people, and that's my driver. It's not about me, it's about them.
In a piece that you did for Asian Voice, you mentioned about early in your career going through cyberbullying.
Oh God, yeah. It was.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Roots, where the stories of the risk takers, the change makers, and those out-of-the-box thinkers are brought to life to find out exactly what influences led them down their unconventional path on their quest to make a positive impact on the world. And my job in this show is to find out about their family roots and the cultures and expectations that they were raised with, along with the internal and external conflicts that they had to deal with in order to help them get there, so that you can learn to do the same. Today's guest is Zamiha Desai, and she is the founder of RecomendAsian and Professional Asian. Her story is incredible, and the community she has built is superb. And what I'm going to find out today is just what helped her get there. Zamiha,
Anand.
There is a term that you have used to describe yourself frequently, which is the accidental entrepreneur.
Correct.
And, I've spoken to a fair few people now who you'd consider having gone down this entrepreneurial journey, whether it's on a passion, a business, even as a performing artist. And normally they tend to be, and really does class them quite well, is this idea of like a one-entrepreneur. It's where the journey's kind of been that they've wanted to go down this path because they found something that they think is a valuable purpose or a mission or, a personal interest to make an impact and a difference. They've wanted to do that, and then they've explored the journey. And you've kind of flipped that on its head. It's almost the opposite, where it's not something you really wanted to do. You didn't want to chase that dream down entrepreneurship, but as you've said, it's kind of accidentally unfolded. What I want to do is kind of start at the earliest context to play out how that journey or what influences may have contributed to that. And what I want to start with is what you may know about your previous generation and how ultimately, you ended up growing up in this country.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a big question. So previous generation, my parents came here from Dar es Salaam in 1971. My mum had already been to the UK to study from when she was 11. And she was here for 6 years and then went back home. So it's been, so she was already kind of acclimatized. And she helped my dad out in his business, and he had an import-export business. So I guess the business side of things has been in my family. When I was growing up, I was quite like risk averse. I liked, having the stability of the job and knowing what my income was every month, and having my 9 to 5 and forgetting about it, and I think the stability, given that everything they saw with the big crash in the 80s and everything that businesses went through, I think they were quite adamant that we had careers that did bring in that income. They never pushed me or my brother down that entrepreneurial route.
Do you know for them whether it was, when it came to them leaving, was there a choice behind it that they wanted to explore new lands, whether it was for opportunities for themselves or, considering the next generation ahead, and they decided to take their risk? Or did it come out of something that was out of their own control?
No, I think it was, so everyone from Uganda had kind of obviously moved out, and I think the economy was going to pot all over like East Africa. And I think as a community, there was like a mass migration. So they either went to Canada or UK, a lot of them.
Yeah.
So I think it was just part of that this was where the opportunities were. And obviously, because my mum had been here before, I think she probably felt a bit more comfortable here than in Canada. Whereas the rest of my dad's family went out to Canada.
Yeah. So your mum came here before, and do you know what she did when she first came here?
So she was studying, so it wasn't really about work. She had polio,
Wow.
and she couldn't get the treatment in East Africa, and so her parents had sent her here for treatment. But because of the cost of travel, she didn't really go back home. So she was in a boarding school, or in a hospital, and during the holidays she was like a lodger at like a farm, I think, and it was very strict. Like, you had to finish everything on your plate. You weren't allowed to talk while you were eating, and she actually grew up very regimented, and her stuff was her own. And I think when she went back to East Africa after her studies, so at 17, 18, I think mainly it was like a culture shock almost, because all of a sudden people were just walking into her room, borrowing her stuff without asking, a little bit kind of lackadaisical. And she was very, this is my stuff, this is my timetable, this is all kinds of things of how she lived her life in the UK, in a boarding school and in boarding houses, coming back to like a very kind of family and community and a nice vibe, but she just wasn't used to it. So I think she took a bit of adjustment.
Do you see where any of those practices that she would have built at such a young age, especially in those years where you are quite a sponge to take in habits and, even culture, as you'd call it, and values and sort of practices, do you see how any of that may have translated to how you were then raised in the home environment that you had?
Yeah, I mean, we had to get dressed. We couldn't walk around in our pajamas.
Yeah. She
would have a real issue with that. My mum she wakes up, has her shower, puts her clothes on, does her makeup, and then comes downstairs. It's not, you will never see her wander around in like trackies and joggers and stuff like that. And she'll have the same thing for breakfast every day around the same time. And, she's very habitual. I wish more of it had actually passed on to me, because I'm not like that anymore. But then maybe I was a bit of a rebellious teenager, and I was like, well, I don't want to do what my mum says.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, she's very disciplined and she's very good. And I guess, yeah, you do learn a lot from that. Just, being consistent every day and showing up in the same way.
And there's something interesting here, because, anyone that knows about RecomendAsian and how it came about, you've been very open in saying that it came from a personal gain or benefit that you realized from it when you knew that you didn't have as much of that connection to the culture of understanding some things that people from your same background or our background might take for granted, that they've just grown up in. And you didn't really have that. Did you see where or what the influences were of her having grown up partly in that sort of East African Asian environment and partly in the UK environment, was it, like you said, when you rebelled, that both environments were presented to you and it was a matter of you deciding to fit in with one or the other? Or
no, I mean, culturally we were quite anglicized, and I think when we had this mass migration as a community, we're Ismaili, and so the Aga Khan had said assimilate into your host culture, and he said don't take on the bad habits, but try and assimilate so that you can progress. So learn the language, get the education. And so that was a real pushing point for, I think, most of my community. And I think maybe in that assimilation we did lose some of our culture. So at home we didn't speak any other language except English. And in fact, even my grandmother was like, I'm going to forget English. So you have to talk to me in English. Otherwise, I won't remember anything, which was great for her. But I guess on the flip side, we didn't learn our language. So I can understand a lot of what my mum says if she's speaking in Kutchi or Gujarati, and not Swahili, because Swahili they're reserved for arguments, so that we can understand anything. But yeah, we can understand stuff. We just haven't, had the opportunity to speak it. Our meals were quite Western. We'd have a lot of like M&S freezer food and stuff like that. And occasionally, obviously, we'd have a curry or a biryani or whatever. And my dad would kind of have more the Indian food, and me and my brother would have more the English food.
Yeah.
And my mum was a great cook. She liked experimenting, and she's very purist. Like, if you said to her, make masala beans, she would, like, literally flinch and cringe. It's either beans or it's a curry. It's never like a mix. You don't put Indian spices. Like, if we have a roast at home, it's very like rosemary and sage and everything. There'll never be any masala on there ever.
That is good to know, because I'm on the opposite. I definitely really stand the case for masala beans being the only way that I would have it.
Well, I like them too.
Yeah.
So I haven't like taken on that element, but I never had it growing up. The first time I saw someone put like vagar on their beans, I was like, you what?
Yeah. That's a great example of cultural mixing, diluting two cultures. But it's really interesting what you said, because I've mentioned this quote before, which is from a book that's called A Beautiful Country. And it's a mother speaking about her Chinese daughter. And she gave her this quote, which says that purple is made up of blue, but is superior to blue. And what it's saying is that, she is ultimately this purple, where she is a mix of the environment she's in now and the environment she's come from. But the mother was saying it almost in a way of fear, that even though it's superior to blue, where she's in this position that she gets to take the strengths of both, but at the same time, it also opens the doors to take the negatives from both. And it comes down to us as the people who are mixing from those two worlds to decide the good that we can take and the bad. But ultimately, we have the potential to be superior to the previous generation because we get to experience both.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's exciting as well. I mean, we get to just experience a whole load of fusion elements and, bring different dynamics to whatever we're doing. So actually, it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah. I always wish I confirmed this, what I was told, because it's this idea of every generation, now that we're in a global world, one bit of the culture gets diluted. And the first one, as soon as people leave their sort of home country, is in the first generation, clothing goes. Because again, you try and assimilate with the environment that you go into, and clothing is the one that stands out. The next generation, and it's always, I forget which way around it is, I think the next is language that goes, because you, exactly to the example that you gave, then it's certain traditions. So, within 3 generations, stuff like Diwali will probably not be celebrated. And again, it's generalizing, but it tends to be the trend that happens. And the 4th one tends to be food. Food tends to stick around the longest. But even that, this is saying that within 4 generations, unless there's not like a proactive attempt to preserve these cultural elements, as the world becomes more global, they'll be completely diluted.
I mean, I don't know, because I think generationally you also kind of have this circular phase that you grow up with this history and this culture. I mean, my mum didn't abandon the culture completely. We still had to go to Jamaat Khana, which is our mosque. We saw, had to wear Indian clothes on certain occasions and weddings and stuff like that. And a lot of those kind of weddings and those kind of cultures do stay alive quite prominently, actually. You kind of go through a phase, so you're nurtured by your parents, and it might be quite a cultural upbringing, and then you hit 18, you go to work or university, and you kind of become a bit more independent. You live your own life, and then sometimes it's about convenience and stuff as well. It's not necessarily a cultural thing. It's just like grabbing what's there, what you can afford, what food is there and stuff. And you kind of maybe just discover yourself a little bit as a person, and the culture doesn't always come into it. Maybe elements of it do, but you're exploring different things. And then I think when you have your children, you kind of understand why these traditions are so important.
Yeah.
Why, you do certain things, how it helps you kind of morally, ethically. And you find a different kind of beauty in your religion or your culture. And then you want to instill that in them so that they don't forget.
Yeah.
And I think even when you're getting married and stuff, like, people do gravitate towards their own kind, or their polar opposite, and they don't want to know. But I think it's always a factor, especially when you're looking at that kind of family upbringing and stuff. I mean, I wasn't the same religion as my late husband, but I was married before that, and we were the same. And so I can kind of see it from both perspectives. Like, I don't think it's important, but I understand how it kind of makes things easier in certain ways, especially bringing up children. And even with, when you're not the same religion, I think there are so many shared cultural norms that there's a lot less you have to explain, which is why I think the groups work so well. Is like that Asian niche is, that when you get married, there's going to be gold, and there's going to be, if anything happens, and sometimes there's an issue and who owns it because it was gifted, and all this kind of, these little cultural idiosyncrasies that we
nuances.
have. They don't need to be explained. It's kind of already understood that that's the way we are. That's the way we respect our elders. That's the way, we might have a certain diet or restrictions or whatever. That's just like a way of life almost.
You mentioned the time where you kind of got the freedom to explore, your own way of being. How did that reflect in your youth in terms of the sort of life you led in school and the friends that you had?
So I was lucky with my parents because they weren't like super strict with me. I was allowed to go out and, I was allowed to talk to boys. I was allowed to do a lot of things that my other friends weren't allowed to do. But when I got to university, I probably did kind of, explore alcohol a little bit more and very late nights and things that my parents might not have approved of so much.
Yeah.
But I didn't go like to any extreme like some of the friends that I had that were really strict upbringings. They went to like completely different extremes. So I think, I kind of explored, I guess, who I was and what I wanted to do and how my religion fitted into that. And I think by the time of second year university, I actually did start going to the mosque once a week in Leeds, just because, I liked that connection, and I don't think I'd realised how much I missed it when I was off doing whatever else I was doing. And so I think, internally, I was brought back to the culture and the religion in some way.
Did you ever at any stage feel a sense of like extreme pride or extreme need to fit in where you didn't want to talk about your background, or was that always something where you were quite comfortable with?
Yeah, I've always been comfortable with it. It is who I am. You can't hide it. Well, I didn't want to hide it. I don't have a problem. And sometimes it does present problems for people that are maybe stricter Muslim. Like, I've been told that my marriage to sham wasn't real because he was a Hindu, and so
Wow.
therefore, yeah, it's not a real marriage. But in my eyes, it's a real marriage, and for them, if that's what they want to think, you know what, that's fine. But at the end of the day, they're not the person that's going to put me in heaven or whatever, like God is. And so God's the only person that can really judge me about stuff like that. You know, I'm doing things with, you know, a pure heart. I married him because I loved him. It was, for me, it was very simple. It was a marriage, end of.
You mentioned Recommended Asian and the sort of build up to how that came about. One of the things that I heard you said is that you got to a point where you started feeling stuck. What was this moment?
So RecomendAsian basically started as a Facebook group. It was very small. It was like 200 people, just my Asian female friends. And I had been recommended a sari pleater, which I thought was phenomenal because you could wear your, you know, Asian dress without having to go to your mum's, which I always had to do. And it was a lot easier to do that. So I wanted to share it with my friends, and this was kind of a good way of doing so. And I think it was at a time when maybe a lot of people were my age and that whole circle that I referred to earlier, that, you know, you want to teach your kids and you want that culture to be part of your life again, and sometimes you didn't know how to access everything. I think it was probably at a point where a lot of people were feeling like that, and because our parents were first generation, they weren't maybe as progressive in their thinking as we were, and it was that balance. And so that kind of peer review and peer understanding and advice just was necessary at that time. And so the group started growing, and I think I was feeling a bit stuck in my job at that time because I was working for a big retailer at the head office in the IT department, and there was a big change in management, and I wasn't enjoying my job as much. Like, I loved my job when I started it, but as soon as this change in management came, you know, all the processes and were just changed up. The resources were different. A lot of people were made redundant, and the workload was massive. And what they wanted, I felt, was a bit unrealistic and a bit unfair of them to ask, because change management is a process. You can't just change overnight and expect everything to be perfect. So I was struggling there, and you know, my kids were in breakfast club, they were in after school club. I didn't have any time, and so I guess it came at a point where it was getting quite popular, and there was like thousands of people on it by this point, and you know, men were asking to join it, and so then I'd set up Professional Asian so that it was a space for men and women and business. And that started growing really quickly as well. So I had these two groups, and obviously there was some kind of need for this, you know, service. And but it took a lot of time to manage. And I was literally, you know, first thing in the morning I'd be online, and I'd drive up to Milton Keynes where the office was, and you know, I'd be in the car park before I went in, and then, you know, I'd, like, on my lunch break and on coffee breaks and stuff, I'd constantly be checking my phone. And trying to kind of manage this group. And I had some friends that were helping me manage it too. But ultimately, it was quite a big task for me. And that my husband had said to me, like, if you want to give it a go, give it a go. You know, if it doesn't work out in 6 months, go back to work. You know, you're not enjoying this job anyway, so just see what happens. And so that's what I did.
Often we get into this position where, especially from the kind of cultures we come from, we catastrophize every possible risk that we might want to take because we see the outcome as something that we can't come back from.
Yeah.
You know, looking into your parents' story and people from where their parents have come from a place that's different to their own, sometimes it was the case that the generation before that did take a risk that probably was almost impossible to come back from, right? Leaving a country with the bare minimum or whatever they could take. Sometimes that can reflect down into how we're then raised to see these kind of risks in that way. Do you see how there may have been that influence where in the mindset, either in your own journey, or now the millions of, or the thousands of people that you help to set up their own businesses, where often these kind of chances to take these opportunities or these risks are just catastrophized because of the kind of culture and environment that we're raised with?
Yeah, I think with a lot of the business community, the blockers are around what will people think.
Yeah.
What if I fail? What if I succeed? What are people going to think of me? And I mean, I just posted about this the other day, that it doesn't matter. They're not your customer. They're not going to buy from you. They're just, projecting their negativity onto you. And why do you have to listen to that? What about if you had surrounded yourself with cheerleaders that were like, yeah, come on, you can do this, you got this? Then you'd probably still be like in the back of your head, like, what if? But that what if has to turn into what if this succeeds? What if this happens? And even the naysayers, they're the first ones to be like, when you become successful, they're the first ones to say, oh, I knew them, or I was at school with them, or, I know someone that can help you and direct people to you. I mean, they're the first ones to kind of support like that, even though they might have thought, at the start it wouldn't work. But I think we do get in our heads about what will people think community-wise and family-wise. And I think it's, it's so unnecessary, because they'll think, whatever, why should that affect you? They're not with you every day of your life, living your life, No,
I love this. And there's, when I was reading up on your story, there's this quote that I love, that it says that you can't fit in and also be exceptional. Both have discomfort. When you fit in, you have the internal conflict because you're not being 100% of you. When you decide to try and be exceptional, you have external conflict because other people see you as different. And so when your friends and family tell you that, oh, you've changed, it's because they don't know how to see, oh, you've grown.
Yeah, that's right. But you have changed, but everybody changes, positively or negatively throughout their lives, all their learning experience. Everybody changes. It's just sometimes the graph is not as steep as when you do something exceptional. And how much do you change as a person versus how much does their perception of you change? I know that there's a lot of people that perceive me a certain way, but my friends and my family, they know exactly, who I am and how I think and stuff. Like, I'm actually very introverted, and a lot of people will be like, no. And I'm like, yeah, I have to really put myself out of my comfort zone in a lot of what I do. But, you have to do it in order to help other people, and that's my driver. It's not about me, it's about them. And I can only help them if I'm going to be visible myself and if I go talk to people myself. So, their perception changes more than you actually change, I think.
You mentioned your husband and the influence he had, but on this point of that internal and external conflict, if people are experiencing something like this, where they've led a certain life, or they've followed a certain expectation, and they may be thinking to do something different, or they're trying to do it now, they'll be able to relate to this idea of having to balance that internal and external conflict. Because either you give in to the external conflict and you accept, like you say, that people will always think, oh, what does that person think of me, and that will stop you from doing it, or eventually you side with the internal conflict, that I can no longer live in this way of not being 100% satisfied with the current me. Do you remember for you what that pivotal moment was? Was there a key turning point where you thought, actually, now I need to follow this internal conflict regardless of what, like you say, the naysayers may think or say?
I think I was so convinced, like, in myself, that this was the right thing to do. And I think the conflict for me was settled because people didn't really understand Facebook groups. And so whoever I spoke to that was in the kind of technical world, who all said, you'll never, it'll never amount to anything.
Yeah.
They weren't familiar with this concept. And I just thought, you just don't know what you're talking about because you're not in it. Like, you don't understand how it works and stuff. And because I was so deep in it, I kind of got it. And so I think I just didn't listen to them because simply I thought, well, you just don't get it. And I do, which, which obviously worked for me. But I think, it's very hard to assess something that you don't know that much about. And even now it's like people don't always understand how it works. And so a lot of the time I get, between the groups, you've got like 160,000 members. Imagine if you just took like a pound off each for membership for a month. I'd had, £160,000 a month, which would be amazing, but it would never work. Like I don't think anybody, that many people at least would pay £1 a month to belong to a group. I just don't think it will happen, but other people don't kind of get it.
Yeah. There's this thing called the myth of the starving artist. Have you come across this?
No, but I'm sure you'll educate me.
It's interesting. It's this idea, when we think of artists or creatives, we often think of this idea, and rightfully so in a way, that they create art out of this internal creativity and this passion, not to sell it, not to commercialize it, but because art is inside them. But then, and it's something that I've heard you say as well, which is that you can have the best business in the world, but if no one knows about it, then it's not a business. So it's the same thing with this idea that just because you're an artist doesn't mean you need to be starving and have this, aura of I live in poverty and paint and I don't want money for it. But there is this balance between still staying authentic to the value you want to give, but knowing that there needs to be an element of knowing how to get it out there. And there's a really good quote, which is like, money allows you to go for another season. So there needs to be some element of, if it's not bringing in anything, it doesn't have the ability to grow for it then to have the value that it can do. Was that a sort of conversation you had to have with yourself when it was like, this needs to somehow go from this really valuable melting pot, which is currently like this small size, but with a bit of extra help or resource or money, I know it could blow up into what it's capable of?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't spend that much money on it because I didn't know where it was going to go. There was still a lot of unknowns because as much as other people didn't know, I didn't 100% know.
Yeah.
Right. And it was there were so many ways to skin a cat as well, like which direction do I go? And some things failed, which is fine because they were all learning curves. And some things worked well. And there were a lot of objections about money, and that impacted me in my head because I'm like, hang on a minute, you're making thousands of pounds per annum because of me, but you're not willing to give it like £100 to help me kind of make it even better for you.
Yeah.
And I couldn't I had a hard time. That's what I had the hardest time with in my head. And it knocked my confidence, and it knocked the way that I thought about sales and what I was offering. And I knew, like I always knew, I could see it every day people were making money. Every day I could see. And I was like, I don't understand why you wouldn't kind of pay for something if you want to make more money. And I still don't get it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, people have their budgets, they have their, marketing allocation and stuff like that. Now I have to respect that, but I do see the value. And if they don't see the value, what can I do? But it's difficult. I mean, it's still difficult, but I'm very satisfied that, I can make them more money. Definitely.
I think it's a very human nature trait of this idea that if someone is doing good, then they shouldn't you almost frown upon them if they want to profit from it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're a community. I had one the other day, but you're a community group.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I am. But, talk about things that are relevant to that community group. It's called Professional Asian.
Yeah.
Talk about stuff that's professional.
Yeah.
That's what it's for. So I had to be quite strict. We were talking earlier about like control freak stuff.
Yes.
So, I mean, in that element, I am quite control freaky because you will get a lot of people saying, oh, just this once, it's a good cause, this, that, and the other. But, I've set myself like the parameters of what we can and what we can't do on Professional Asian. Like, I will not have anyone post a negative review of anyone. That's not what it's for. And while I understand when people say, but, the community should know that, this business is like this. Actually, that business might be like that, but what's the other side of the story?
Yeah.
You can destroy, you've got like 90,000 members. You can destroy a business if you put something on there, because people like that scandal side of things. But if you ever try to retract it, it wouldn't be, the damage is already done. And I think sometimes what you find is, well, it's kind of fair enough sometimes. Like I had a rant the other day about somebody not getting a haul, but they hadn't put the deposit down. Now, I can understand the frustration because it's happened to me that, I want this haul and it's available. And then, you kind of take your time and then somebody else comes in and says, I want it. Here's a deposit. As a business, what do? You go for the deposit. It's the money in your hand. I get it. I get it from the business's point of view. I get it from the customer's point of view. But I wouldn't destroy this venue's business because they're doing exactly what they say they'll do in their charter. If you want to book somewhere, you put a deposit down.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to be quite strict and understand. I've forgotten the original question.
No, but I love this point of the control freak because, again, it's something that you have kind of like self-admitted that it is something that you've had. And I think control freak often gets painted with this negative brush, but, especially, the word freak in it. But it's something that, again, having spent some time speaking to other people who've created something of their own, listening to podcasts, reading books, a lot of these people in some form or another are self-proclaimed control freaks, because as much as, especially in the beginning, when you see yourself becoming like that, you can often see yourself as cumbersome, nitpicky, almost a burden on the people that are trying to help you. But in order for anything to be created to the level of greatness that you see it as being your vision, requires this level of being a control freak and almost, this idea of perfectionism, where you'll often hear people say that perfectionism is the enemy of taking action. I don't think I fully agree with that. I think if there is perfectionism behind something, then it's on your mind all the time, that you're always thinking of ways to make it better.
But it's never going to be perfect.
No. So
and that's
action
the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. It will never, because even when you create something to perfection, you'll always notice a flaw that you haven't thought of.
Yeah.
And I gave up on perfection a long time ago. Just because it was holding me back so much, because I was never getting anything done, because it was like next iteration. And it didn't work. And I think perfect to you is different. So this, for example, this podcast, like, it might not be perfect for you, because you might have wanted like the plants higher. You might have wanted something on the table. You might have wanted a different guest. There's lots of different things that you could have wanted, but actually the viewer or the listener doesn't necessarily know that. So they don't know that you've not reached the perfection that you've had in your head, but they're still hopefully getting value out of this conversation and what we're talking about. And that's what is perfect, is for me, is that somebody else is getting some kind of value. So it doesn't matter if my makeup's done. But that doesn't matter to me as much as having a conversation with you. Right. And so I could have been another half an hour quite easily and put a full face on and done my hair and everything. But I didn't, because what's the priority here?
Yeah.
Right. It's my respect for your time. And the reason I took an Uber rather than drive is because I don't want to faff around parking, because I did want to be on time. Like, that's my respect for you. And that comes over how my face looks.
Yeah. And I think it's just got me thinking while you were saying that. And I think it's almost comparing this idea of perfect versus perfectionism, and fully agree with what you say. I think perfectionism to me is the idea of taking the action and, like you say, through every iteration getting closer to that version of perfect that you have. Whereas a lot of the time, this idea of making something perfect is people's excuse to procrastinate around the idea of not taking the action.
Yeah.
So as long as you're doing it, like you say, if the plant wanted to be a bit higher, I could sit back and be like, it's not as high as I want, so I'm not gonna do it.
Right.
Or I could think, okay, now I've noticed it's not high enough, but I'm going to take the action and do it, so that through the next iteration, as long as the core behind what it is, for me, it's having a valuable conversation that gets delivered to a certain level of quality for the audience. For you with your group, it's, everything you say of building a community where everyone is mutually benefiting and no one is knocking someone else down. So the core values remain.
Yeah.
There could still be things that, through the events that you've done, something like Hey Gorgeous, which has received, unbelievable praise. In your head, there are things that you'd have wanted to be slightly better or slightly different, but it didn't stop you doing the event.
No.
And I think that's something that is one of the key things that I've taken away from people that I've seen make it, is that there's still so many kinks in their product or their service, but they kept going because it was an itch that they knew that they couldn't sit back and not do what they needed to do to give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a piece that you did for Asian Voice, you mentioned about early in your career going through cyberbullying.
Oh God, yeah. It was, like I said, I'm quite strict with the rules, and somebody was trying to post something about an initiative that they hadn't actually experienced, they'd just heard of. And when I looked at this initiative, I kind of got, sometimes you just get a feeling that this is not right. This isn't even like possible to execute well. And it looked more like a kind of marketing exercise to gather information and people's names and what have you, rather than actually providing any value, because a lot of the wording was quite vague. It was impossible. So I declined it. And this person actually, they hadn't had any experience with this company. And oh my gosh, he was like not happy. And he was like, oh, I'm going to do this to your website and I'm going to do that, and kind of slate me on other Facebook groups. And another person that was a business was making some women feel incredibly uncomfortable, and obviously as a service you may have their names and addresses and everything. So I did take him off the group, and he's like, 80% of my business comes from the group. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I'm not dealing with these kind of complaints about you. And I got letters at my home and all sorts of stuff. So so it can be a little bit of a scary place when people don't aren't happy with some of your decisions. But I mean, I would imagine that lots of businesses that have those kind of things happen to them where they feel a bit threatened, or they felt a way about how they've interacted with a customer and what the threats and stuff are. But that's kind of scary.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because things like this, and I like the use of the word scary, but they can set you back in maybe not pursuing what you are, especially early on. If you think, well, if this is what it's opening up to me, then maybe I'm not ready for this. So I think there's a certain level of bravery that you need to take. And there's two things I think you can't fake which is bravery and motivation. If you're not brave about something, but you still do it, that is bravery. If you're not motivated to do something, but you still do it, that is motivation. You can't fake it. So in this, this bravery to still go on, or resilience even, do you see anywhere in either the way you're raised or what you've been through that has built this sort of resilience in you that allowed you to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing about when you're being like slated in other media or Facebook groups or whatever, and you can see like a few like hateful comments and stuff, I think you just have to think, well, the people that know me know me, and they know that I'm not like this, and just have faith in that, because not everybody's going to like you. So I had to let that go, that not everyone's going to like me. And that was a hard thing for me to do, because I like being liked.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like that kind of people pleaser at heart. And so if people don't like me, I get like a little bit, I take it quite personally. But I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And I get that in that kind of environment, it's so high level. They don't know me. They just know that I'm not doing something that they want me to do. And that's for my reasons, but they don't appreciate that, because they think that their cause is stronger than mine. But, obviously this guy, he gets 80% of his business. His cause is money. Mine is protecting the women on my platform from feeling scared and vulnerable. And that's my bigger why. And he's never going to understand that. And so he's always going to hate me because I took away some of his income. What do you do? I mean, there's nothing I can do. My purpose is always going to override that.
Yeah.
And I just have to stick to that. And if he doesn't like me, then fine, he doesn't like me. But all these women, hopefully they like me, or even if they don't know about it. Well, probably a lot of them don't even know that I've done that.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter to me. All right. The fact is that they're never going to come to me and say, this guy make me feel like that, because they'll never get him from my platform. And that's what's more important to me. So, I mean, you don't always have to sing about, what you've done and how wonderful you are. For me, just knowing is enough. But, I mean, I guess, going through a divorce and stuff, especially with that taboo in the community and stuff like that, I mean, that kind of builds you as well, because it's times like that where you genuinely do realise who your friends are and who's got your back and who supports you. And I think you probably realise that actually it's a very small amount of people that are truly, truly championing you. Everybody else might just be gossiping about you. But like I said, they don't live with me every day. They're not in my immediate circle. They're not in my life. If they want to say that, that's fine. They'll move on to the next piece of gossip soon enough. And, I'm not going to stop it. I'm not going to stay in a marriage because of what other people think.
Yeah.
Because they don't live that life every day with me.
I love that. And, it's a point that it gets drilled home about, the people that care don't matter.
Yeah, so we're putting all the matter onto people that don't actually really genuinely care about us.
Yeah.
They're just, bystanders with an opinion that is not even, it's not even an opinion based on anything true. It's on a story that they've probably constructed in their head with a lot of assumptions and a lot of false information. But I mean, like, I'm glad that I didn't listen and went my own path, because then I met Sham and I had a great marriage with him. And maybe that's the reason why RA and PA are where they are today. Everything that you go through builds you, whether it's positive or negative. It builds your mindset, builds who you are, builds your beliefs, builds your tolerances.
I'm really glad that you touched on the start of that, on the why. For you, what is your major or your biggest why for why you have RA and PA doing what it is? And is it a why that's changed from when it first started out compared to what it is now?
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, there's not just one why. There's lots of whys. I mean, the why when I started was I could just see how much it was helping people. I think in those early days, the amount of feedback I used to get and the amount of people that used to tell me that we've made a difference in their lives, whether it's in a tiny way, like they might have found someone amazing to thread their eyebrows, all the way to they might have had the confidence to walk out of an abusive marriage. They might have found a fertility treatment that's worked for them and now they have kids. Like there's so many people that have been impacted just because of this peer advice.
Yeah.
You know, that's like amazing. That's literally helping people every day. And it's not even those that post. So many people have said, oh, I read this and I was literally just thinking that and, you know, it solved my problem or the answer came to me or whatever. And that's like a powerful reason to do anything if you're impacting someone's life. And I didn't try to make it too big. Like, you know, if it's in a small way, that's enough for me. I've made a difference and I've made someone's life a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I think the why with the purpose has never changed. Like I always, you know, want to make people's lives better.
Yeah.
I want to make their businesses succeed. I want them to be confident. I want them to have a better life. I think when my late husband got ill, actually it was so good for me because I could still do all of this stuff, but I could flex my time because I had my own business.
Yeah.
And that's probably why I kind of champion a lot of the small businesses, because I can see that, you know, if you have kids, if you have poorly parents, if you have like, you know, a sick husband, if, you know, you've got lots of multiple things going on in your life, you can still have an amazing life and make an impact and not have to be at your desk every second of every day. And I really want to empower women to be able to do that as well. So that's come from my kind of personal journey and realizations of, wow, when you have your own business, look what you can do and look what you can achieve and look what kind of life you have. It wasn't that, you know, Sham passed away a year ago. And I think without doing what I do, I would not have been able to spend the time that I spent with him. I wouldn't have been able to take him to his hospital appointments. You know, we ended up doing home dialysis. I was there dialysing him. You know, I was there for him and I got to spend time with him. And I think that, you know, that was life-changing for me. And I hope that, you know, other women can understand that their lives can be different if they had that power and confidence, you know, to flex their time as well and have their own business.
Have you ever seen people that have tried to directly imitate or mimic what you've done?
I have, yes.
Yeah. And what's your take on?
I mean, it's good to know that it's a concept worth copying because that means it's a good concept. I think ultimately the goal is to help small businesses. So it happens more with Professional Asian. But I think ultimately our goals are the same. So if we have a number of Facebook groups that all help small businesses, then, I mean, that's a good thing because, you know, that's what it's all about. That's what I'm about. So I don't want to be like, oh, you know, you're trying to compete with me or whatever. I'm like, if you can get business out of them, join them as well. Because as a business, your priority is to make money. And so if, you know, other places are helping you make money, then you should 100% go to them. I think those other people, they're not us. They will provide something different. They will have a different mentality and mindset and ways of running things. And, you know, sometimes they suit people more than we suit people. But I think we suit a lot of people. So I'm quite confident in, you know, in our service and what we provide. And I think people are happy with us.
I love that because, you know, it's such a pertinent thing, which is success has become something that we want to be rather than something we want to do, because a lot of people start to look at people that are doing well and think, oh, I want to be like that. But that's why I think the why is so important, because, you know, your why is really clear. And even when you repeat it, it's about helping the small business. It's about empowering people. When that why is clear, people that try and imitate and don't get that why, they'll never be able to do what you've done. And so, you know, the thing you say about kind of being happy that people will try and create it as long as that why is still there. If that why is not there and they just see who you are and just want to be you and not do what you've done, then sure, it might work to some extent. But as soon as there's like weeds to chop through or a certain bend in the road, they won't know how to adjust because they've only seen the what you've done and not the why that you've done it.
That's right.
Yeah.
But actually, if they were just themselves and went with their own why, they'd probably be a lot more successful than copying somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think, it's not, we all go to different shops. We might go to Asda one day and Morrison's and Tesco's, and we all, there's no, loyalty necessarily. Everybody is free to choose where they want to buy stuff from. And I think it's the same when people go visit small businesses. They might choose to buy from me and somebody else or whatever. If they're going for clothes, they might go, there's a number of people that do clothes or jewellery or, whatever. They're free to go to different people. And as long as there's a lovely selection, I think they will always shop around. So, a business priority is obviously to make money, but an individual's priority is to buy what makes them happy. It's their money at the end of the day. So, it's up to you to provide, stuff that they're going to be happy buying.
We've talked about how, what you've created and the idea of how being that sort of control freak to make it happen as you've wanted it to is actually quite important to make it as great it is today. But there's always that thing of when the time comes for the founder or the owner, the sort of mastermind behind it to move on and pass it on because they want it to carry on beyond their time. There's always that risk, or it's quite often that slowly it starts to lose its, that magic. So a few years down the line, someone might turn around and be like, it doesn't have that same value or that same magic that it had in the beginning, because now the owner's been taken away and no one really knows how to be the same as the person who started it. What message do you have for when that time comes to hand over the baton to whoever will then carry on running RecomendAsian or Professional Asian? What is the one value or thing that you still want them to keep it as the core of what it stands for?
I'm very adamant that the people that I work with are very aligned to me. And so my team are very aligned to my mindset. They get it 100%. People that I collaborate with also get it 100%. Their vision is something that really aligns with our vision. And I think as long as we keep working on that vision and collaborating and having team members that are still aligned, I think that will always stay. The magic of stuff does wear off. It's just part and parcel. It's like any kind of shiny new object. Some people will treasure it for a long time, even when it's old and crusty. And some people will move on to the next one. And I think you can't take that personally as a business. You can't be like, oh, you're not supporting me anymore, because their lives have moved on, their priorities have shifted. They're doing different stuff. You can't expect support. You have to just deliver consistently what you're delivering, and if it's right for them, they'll take it. And I think I'm not driven by money as such. Obviously we need to make some in order to keep the team, in order to keep the processes and the automations and anything that we have going that we have to pay for. We need to have money, but it's not about being this multi-billionaire. It's about, let's just stay true to our values and help people. And the more money we make, actually the more I put into the business in order to help them more. So for example, now I pay for the networking events, so I'll cover the teas and coffees and lunches and stuff like that for my members, because I can do now, whereas before it was a bit more pay as you go. But I'm investing in them, and I want them to turn up and learn and enjoy and not worry about anything and feel spoiled.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I like to feel. And so that's how I want them to feel. And I think that's a lot of the way I've run this. How do I like to feel? And so if the baton is passed on to somebody who's quite similar to me, and has the same values and is not about, you know, the money all the time, then I think it will be fine. But
Yeah.
I'm not stepping down anytime soon.
That's good to
Just
hear.
so you know.
That's what we like to hear. And one of the biggest things about RecomendAsian and Professional Asian, and it's a word that you use frequently in what it stands for, is community.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting word because I started this podcast by interviewing my dad and his family about their time in growing up in East Africa. I've spoken to other people about their previous generations and where they've come from, and one of the most common words that always comes up is the sense of community that they always had. And it's something that can get very easily lost when they move abroad, because now suddenly they're in a place where, especially a place like London and like you said, Canada, that same community spirit that was had back then doesn't hold as strong. And it's for a number of reasons, you know, living in a busier place. You know, back in certain places, they needed to stick together more because they had a certain belief and they were much more of a minority. But as that gets lost, it feels like what you're creating here is bringing that back. Do you see any influence of like your sense of understanding of what community may have been before and the community that you grew up in that might have, you know, also driven you to really want to make what you made today?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I loved being a Smiley. When I was younger, I loved going to the mosque. I loved the social aspect of it, especially. And we still have a lot of things that the Smiley community organises. Like, you know, they would do, like when I was younger, they would do dance parties. They would do like Garba. They would do like sports festival. Our sports festivals still run. You know, the youth committee still do stuff for the youth. And we've got like entrepreneurial stuff. We've got like things that help the older generation, and, you know, social and welfare. We've got like an economic planning board. We've got like mediation. We have a lot of stuff that is all voluntary that our community do. And, you know, I appreciate that so much. And admittedly, as I've got older, I participate less and less.
Yeah.
But it's good for me to know that it's always there. It's good for me to know that my children, you know, they went to the religion classes, and you know, that and they have that also sense of community. You're right, it's not as strong as it was in my day, but then we have different things now. Like in my day, there wasn't WhatsApp, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't, I don't think there was even mobile phones when I was growing up, to be honest, until I was like, I hit my 20s. So, you know, I guess it was a different time, and the community aspect was really important to me. And now it's still important to me, and I like that, you know, I'm a Smiley and stuff, but I also like that I'm Asian, and that hasn't really got anything to do with religion for me. It's that, you know, like you were saying, the dress, the food, you know, the way that we are, the way that we communicate, the things that we find funny. For that, to me, it doesn't really matter what religion you are.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of shared tapestry of culture that I really like and I appreciate a lot. And, you know, I remember when I think I was in my 20s, and I think Gwen Stefani was wearing the bindi, and like, you know, it was like the dresses with the trousers that were a little bit like kind of trendy Salwakis and stuff. Actually, being Asian is very cool.
Yeah.
And I think we forget how cool it is. And I think a lot of the things that I like doing, like I went to the beauty awards and I wore a sari. I was the only one in the room in a sari, but I was very, you know, proud to be wearing like a beautiful Indian outfit with like lovely jewelry, and you know, and it being admired for what it is as part of my culture and heritage. And yeah, I stuck out like a sore thumb, but that wasn't a bad thing for me. I thought, yeah, well, you know, we should represent. We have beautiful stuff, and we should like be telling the world about it. We shouldn't be hiding it.
Yeah, you're right. And you know, earlier you mentioned the idea of these things going in a circle, that the idea of cultural influence or appreciation, let's say, for it. And yeah, back to your point, you know, it's something that we may have seen before as, oh no, we don't want to stand out because we wear these kind of things. But you're right, it's suddenly it's come back on itself, and people appreciate it because it's colorful. It makes you stand out in a good way rather than in a bad way.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think what you're doing with bringing this community together of Asians, of professionals, is allowing people to express, doesn't even just have to be their culture, but these things that bring pride to, you know, what it means to be from this kind of background. And, you know, I think it's an amazing thing that you're allowing people to do. So no doubt it's going to keep on growing from strength to strength.
Thank you.
And, you know, in the same way that, you know, people are inspired by hearing stories, or, you know, podcasts especially, and the ones you've been on before, and what this one tries to do is bring out the stories of people's journey that are getting them to where they have, and you're doing that exact same thing because you love it for these small businesses. So yeah, a huge thank you for that.
Thank
you. And so just to finish, I have a question that I ask every guest, and that is, you know, for your future generation, so looking at your kids, if you had one message that you could write on a piece of paper that they would read and live by, what would you want that to be?
I had a conversation with a girl on Instagram a while ago, and she was considering marrying she was Hindu, and she wanted to marry a Muslim guy, but he wanted her to change a lot about herself, and she was very in love. And she was like, well, I don't mind, you know, changing my name and changing my religion and bringing the kids up like this. And I was like, okay. But she's like, I don't want to lose him. And I was like, you know, just forget him for a moment. And what I said was, design your life. Design your life and figure out how you're going to get to live that life that you want. I'm like, I'm Muslim, but I'm not going to tell you to become Muslim because you have a beautiful culture. I was like, do you really want to not go to the temple with your children? Do you not want them to see your Ganpati around your houses? Is that what you want? Do you want to not go to Garba anymore? Is that what you want? Like, what kind of life do you want to have? You know, what do you want to earn? It could be anything. What do you want to earn? What kind of marriage do you want to have? What kind of life do you want to have? Think about that, and then think about what is going to serve that and what isn't. And if this isn't going to serve how you envisage your life because you're feeling in love now, is that life long term going to make you happy? And I think and that's what I want my children to do, is think what's going to make them happy, what careers are going to make them happy, what kind of relationships are going to make them happy, how do they want to live their life? And then, all right, how are you going to achieve it now? What's your plan?
Design your life. I love that. That could be the title for the episode.
Okay.
But no, again, thank you so much. Thanks for really being open with all the aspects of your personal life, and really what is in the mind of Zamiha that has allowed RecomendAsian and Professional Asian to happen. It's been really insightful. So thank you so much.
Thank you. But it's interesting. I haven't been asked like the negative side of things so much. I'm surprised that you brought up that cyberbullying thing.
You know, having heard you say that, and because I remember you mentioned that it was quite early on, it can be a thing that can make people be like, oh, this isn't for me. Like I don't want to get into a world where, especially being a people pleaser, like suddenly people hate me. Like, no thanks. So then to me that showed like you had a certain like grit about you that I'm not going to let this stop me.
No. And I think like I said here, I think you get to a certain place and there's always going to be people that don't like you. And it could be for a number of reasons. It could be they're jealous. It could be that it doesn't fit their agenda, which I think this happened. But, what can you do? It's a good thing if you're making waves.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that if you do want to make a difference, you're probably going to have to upset some people along the way in some way. Right? It doesn't mean for them to hate you, but they'll be like, what? But then, like you say, that's sometimes you need that to make waves.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in. If you did enjoy the episode, then I'd love for you to check out this one over here, because I think you'll love it as well. And if you haven't done so already, then feel free to click on this one here so you can subscribe to the channel. Apart from that, I'll see you next time.